Chapter 1: Early Life and Technical Curiosity. Bob Lazar was born on January 26, 1959, in Coral Gables, Florida. He grew up during a period when the United States was deeply engaged in scientific competition with the Soviet Union. The space race shaped the imagination of an entire generation. Rockets lifted off from Cape Canaveral only a few hours from where he lived. Science was presented not only as a profession, but as a frontier. Very little verifiable documentation exists about Lazar's childhood. He has described himself as a technically inclined young man who was drawn to physics and electronics from an early age. According to his own accounts, he was less interested in formal classroom structures and more interested in experimentation. He has often framed his youth as one marked by hands-on mechanical exploration rather than academic discipline. During the 1970s, the United States experienced rapid technological growth. Lazar has stated that he spent significant time building devices and experimenting with propulsion concepts. After high school, Lazar moved west. By the late 1970s, he was living in California and later in New Mexico. It was during this period that he began to appear in local media as an eccentric tinkerer. In 1982, the Los Alamos Monitor published a short feature about him. The article described a jet-powered Honda that Lazar had modified in his driveway. The story included a photograph of him standing beside the vehicle. The caption referred to him as a physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory. This small newspaper article would later become an important document in debates about his background. Supporters pointed to it as evidence that he had professional standing within a major national laboratory. Skeptics noted that local newspapers sometimes rely on self-reported descriptions of occupation. It does, however, confirm that Lazar was physically present in the Los Alamos community and engaged in mechanical experimentation. Los Alamos National Laboratory was, and remains, one of the most significant scientific institutions in the United States. Established during the Manhattan Project, it operated at the intersection of physics, national security, and secrecy. Lazar has consistently stated that he studied physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and electronics at the California Institute of Technology. According to him, he completed advanced degrees in the early 1980s. However, both institutions have stated that they have no record of his enrollment. This discrepancy would later become one of the most debated aspects of his biography. In the early stages of his public story, Lazar framed his educational background as rigorous and elite. Yet the absence of transcripts or faculty recollections has led critics to question these claims. Before he became associated with Area 51, Lazar's documented life appears to revolve around technical contracting and small-scale business ventures. Public records indicate that he had financial difficulties in the mid-1980s. Bankruptcy filings show that he struggled with debt. These documents are part of the public record. They present a more complicated portrait than that of a stable government physicist. The early 1980s were a time of expanding defense budgets under the Reagan administration. Classified aerospace programs were proliferating in Nevada and California. The Nevada test site and Groom Lake facility, commonly known as Area 51, were active locations for experimental aircraft testing. Public awareness of these sites was limited, but within defense communities they were known as hubs of advanced research. At this stage in his life, Lazar was not yet a public figure. What exists are scattered public records, a newspaper article, and his later testimony. The absence of detailed documentation makes it difficult to construct a complete picture. For historians and journalists, this absence becomes part of the story. By the mid-1980s, Lazar had relocated to Nevada. Las Vegas was expanding rapidly. The city offered anonymity and opportunity. Lazar later described this period as transitional. He claimed that he was approached for work connected to advanced propulsion systems. According to his account, this opportunity would alter the course of his life. At this point in the chronology, there is no public evidence of extraterrestrial claims. Instead, we see a technically inclined individual living near major defense facilities and navigating financial challenges. The significance of this early period lies in how it sets the foundation for what followed. Supporters argue that Lazar's mechanical aptitude and proximity to national laboratories make his later claims plausible. Skeptics argue that inconsistencies in his educational history undermine his credibility. In 1988, Lazar was living in Nevada and moving within circles that included scientists and entrepreneurs. According to his later account, it was during this period that he received an invitation connected to a highly classified project south of Groom Lake. Chapter 1 closes at the threshold of that claim. We have a young man fascinated by technology, associated peripherally with Los Alamos, and living within geographic reach of one of the most secretive installations in the United States. The record is incomplete. The stage is set for the events that would soon bring his name into national attention. Understanding this early context is essential before examining the extraordinary claims that followed. Chapter 2: Los Alamos and the Question of Credentials. By the mid-1980s, Bob Lazar's life had settled in the American Southwest. The desert landscape was home to some of the most sensitive scientific installations in the United States. Los Alamos National Laboratory stood at the center of this network. Established to design the first atomic weapons, it remained a cornerstone of nuclear research and defense science throughout the Cold War. The first documented connection between Lazar and Los Alamos appears in the 1982 article from the Los Alamos Monitor. It was a human interest story focused on engineering enthusiasm rather than professional biography. Yet this small reference would later become pivotal. Supporters argue that it demonstrates he held a formal scientific position. Skeptics respond that local newspapers often rely on self-descriptions. The document remains suggestive but inconclusive. Publicly available laboratory phone directories from the early 1980s list a Robert Lazar associated with Los Alamos. The listing does not specify title or department. In large research institutions, phone directories frequently include employees, subcontractors, and temporary staff. Inclusion in such a directory does not automatically confirm senior scientific rank. It does, however, indicate some level of affiliation. Lazar stated that his performance led to his recruitment into a far more secretive program. The laboratory itself has not released detailed personnel files. However, statements from Los Alamos over the years indicate they have no record of Lazar being employed as a physicist. Some reports suggest he may have worked for a subcontractor. The distinction between direct employment and subcontracted work would later become central to public debate. Parallel to the employment question stands the issue of education. MIT and Caltech have publicly stated that they have no record of his attendance. In academic environments, archival records are typically preserved with great care. The absence of such records has been interpreted in two opposing ways. Critics argue it undermines Lazar's credibility. Supporters counter that classified programs sometimes obscure records to protect secrecy. Lazar has suggested that his educational history was erased in retaliation for his later disclosures. From a historical perspective, complete erasure across multiple independent institutions would represent a significant and coordinated action. During this period, Lazar also became involved in small business activities in Nevada. Public records indicate that he later operated a photo processing laboratory and became connected to a legal case in Las Vegas. That episode occurred after his public claims about Area 51, but it contributed to skepticism regarding his overall reliability. In scientific culture, peer verification is fundamental. Degrees, publications, and institutional affiliations create a traceable record. Lazar's record, by contrast, appears fragmented. In the 1980s, public fascination with secret government programs was increasing. Investigative journalism had exposed intelligence scandals. The Iran-Contra affair unfolded during this same period. Distrust of institutions was not uncommon. Against this backdrop, claims of concealed credentials and erased records resonated with certain audiences. By 1988, Lazar's story had not yet entered national consciousness. The questions surrounding his background would only gain prominence after he began describing work at a site known as S4. Chapter 2, therefore, stands at a critical juncture. The Los Alamos connection exists, but is not fully defined. The historical record is incomplete, and interpretation depends largely on the weight assigned to institutional documentation versus personal testimony. As the chronology advances into 1989, these unresolved questions will shape the reception of an extraordinary claim. the credibility of the messenger will become inseparable from the credibility of the message. Before examining that claim, it is necessary to understand the uncertainty that already surrounded him. Chapter 3. Recruitment to a classified program. By the late 1980s, Bob Lazar was living in Las Vegas, Nevada, within driving distance of one of the most secretive military installations in the United States. South of Groom Lake, beyond the dry lakebed airstrip associated with Area 51, lay additional restricted zones. During this period, the Cold War was still active. Defense research remained highly compartmentalized. Information moved on a strict need-to-know basis. According to Lazar's account, his alleged recruitment began through connections formed at Los Alamos. He stated that a scientist named Edward Teller played an indirect role. Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, maintained influence in defense research. Lazar claimed he met Teller during a visit to Los Alamos, and this contact later contributed to his selection for advanced propulsion research. No public documentation confirms this, but Teller had long-standing involvement in high-level scientific advisory roles. Lazar has stated that in 1988, he was approached regarding a position connected to propulsion research. He described undergoing security screening procedures, including background investigations and the signing of non-disclosure agreements. He has claimed that after passing checks, he was transported to a site south of Groom Lake, known as S4. According to his description, S4 was located near Papoose Lake, concealed within the side of a mountain. He stated that the facility contained hangar doors camouflaged to blend with the desert terrain. At the time Lazar first described S4, the existence of such a facility had not been acknowledged. Groom Lake itself was not officially recognized until decades later. Employees reportedly commuted by unmarked aircraft from Las Vegas. Public access was heavily restricted. The recruitment process included transportation by bus with blacked-out windows and entry into secured hangars. He described biometric hand-scanning devices used to verify identity. Declassified photos later confirmed such devices were used at certain secure facilities during that era. According to Lazar, his role at S4 involved examining propulsion systems from recovered craft of non-human origin. He stated that upon arrival, he was briefed through documents describing extraterrestrial contact. He has described reading materials outlining the origin of the craft and the history of government involvement. These documents have never been publicly produced. Their existence rests solely on his testimony. In Lazar's narrative, the compartmentalization of information was extreme. Personnel were assigned narrow tasks without full knowledge of the broader project. Chronologically, Lazar places his alleged work at S4 in late 1988. By his own account, his tenure was brief and increasingly strained. He claimed that his curiosity led him to bring friends near the perimeter of the test site to observe scheduled flight demonstrations. This decision, he says, ultimately led to his dismissal. Chapter 3 closes at the threshold of that claim. We have a young man fascinated by technology, associated peripherally with Los Alamos, and living within reach of one of the most secretive installations in the world. The record is incomplete, the narrative is contested, the stage is set for the events that would soon bring his name into national attention. In the years ahead, Bob Lazar would present a story that challenged official secrecy and captivated millions. Understanding this early context is essential before examining the extraordinary claims that followed. Chapter 4. The alleged reverse engineering project. According to Bob Lazar, his assignment at S4 did not involve conventional aerospace research. He has consistently stated that his task was to participate in the reverse engineering of propulsion systems taken from recovered craft of non-human origin. This claim, first made publicly in 1989, remains the central and most controversial element of his narrative. Lazar has described the facility as containing 9 disc-shaped craft housed in separate hangars built into the side of a desert mountain. He has stated that these craft varied slightly in size and configuration, but shared common structural characteristics. He referred to them as vehicles rather than aircraft, suggesting that their operational principles differed fundamentally from conventional aerodynamic design. In his account, the craft operated through the manipulation of gravity. Lazar described a propulsion system based on gravity amplification. According to his explanation, the craft contained 3 gravity emitters positioned beneath the hull. These emitters could distort space-time in front of the vehicle, allowing it to fall toward a created gravitational distortion. Mainstream physics does not currently recognize a practical method for generating controlled gravitational fields through compact devices. No experimentally verified technology exists that can amplify gravity in the manner Lazar described. Central to his explanation was element 115. At the time of his initial statements, the element had not yet been formally recognized. Lazar claimed it served as the fuel source, producing antimatter reactions when bombarded with protons. In 2003, scientists in Russia synthesized Moscovium, atomic number 115. While some see this as validation, critics emphasize that synthesized versions are highly unstable and decay in fractions of a second, unlike the stable isotope Lazar described. Lazar described the interior of one craft as small and proportioned for beings shorter than humans. Control interfaces were minimal, consisting of smooth surfaces without visible wiring. There was an absence of conventional structural reinforcement, suggesting the craft's integrity was maintained by the gravitational field. Consistency in these descriptions over decades has contributed to the perception that he believes his own account. However, reverse engineering based on unknown principles presents significant obstacles. Lazar has not provided schematics, measurements, or reproducible data. Mainstream research in the late 80s was probing subatomic behavior with particle accelerators, but produced no evidence of gravity generators. Lazar's claims stand outside the established experimental framework. Also, no corroborated witnesses have publicly confirmed participation in the same program. Non-disclosure agreements are binding, but no independently verified co-worker has come forward in decades. Chronologically, Lazar places his hands-on experience in late 1988. He stated his access was progressively restricted. He claims to have been shown briefing documents describing extraterrestrial biological entities and historical contact events. These components would soon move from private testimony to public broadcast. From a scientific perspective, extraordinary claims require proportionate evidence. The absence of physical artifacts remains the primary obstacle to acceptance. Chapter 4 concludes at the moment when Lazar's experience had not yet been shared with the world. The alleged reverse engineering project existed entirely within a classified setting. The transition from secrecy to public disclosure would occur next, and it would fundamentally alter both his life and the broader discourse surrounding unidentified aerial phenomena. In the next chapter, we will examine how Bob Lazar went public. Chapter 5. Going public in 1989. In the spring of 1989, Bob Lazar made a decision that would permanently alter the trajectory of his life. Until that point, his account of work at a facility south of Groom Lake had remained private. The transition from secrecy to public disclosure occurred in Las Vegas, a city accustomed to the presence of restricted military activity in the surrounding desert. The first public mention of Lazar's claims came through investigative reporter George Knapp of KLS Television. In May 1989, Knapp aired an interview with an anonymous source whose face was obscured and whose voice was altered. The individual identified himself only as Dennis. In the broadcast, he described working at a site near Area 51 where non-human craft were being studied. Although his identity was concealed, the details presented were specific: disc-shaped vehicles, gravity-based propulsion, and element 115. The program drew immediate local attention. Within months, Lazar agreed to reveal his identity. In November 1989, he appeared on television openly, stating his name and repeating his claims. The decision to go public carried legal and personal risk. Lazar has said that he chose disclosure out of concern for his safety and frustration with the secrecy surrounding the program. He stated that during his time at S4, he brought friends to observe scheduled flight demonstrations. On at least one occasion, they witnessed an object moving anomalously. There is no independent verification of scheduled extraterrestrial flight demonstrations. However, test flights of classified aircraft were common. Observers unfamiliar with experimental designs might interpret unusual flight profiles as anomalous. After revealing his identity, Lazar became a subject of intense media scrutiny. Local journalists revisited his educational claims. Institutions cited as alma maters stated they had no record of his attendance. Lazar responded by asserting that records had been deliberately erased. The late 1980s were a transitional moment in media. Cable TV and talk radio devoted to paranormal topics were gaining audiences. Lazar soon appeared on programs such as Coast to Coast AM. His calm demeanor and technical vocabulary contributed to the perception that he was describing genuine experience. In 1990, federal authorities conducted a raid on a business associated with Lazar. Official records indicate it concerned allegations unrelated to UFOs, but some supporters saw it as retaliation. This episode complicated his image. Chronologically, it is important to separate his initial disclosure from later legal troubles. During 1989 and 1990, Lazar's story began to circulate nationally. UFO research groups invited him to speak. The absence of internet distribution limited reach, yet word of his claims extended beyond Nevada. The US government did not formally respond. Without confirmation or denial, the story occupied a space between speculation and documented secrecy. By the early 90s, Lazar had become a central figure in modern UFO discourse. Lazar did not return to a conventional scientific career. His name became permanently associated with Area 51. Chapter 5 marks the moment when private testimony became public controversy. From this point forward, evaluation would occur within a growing ecosystem of researchers and skeptics. The next stage would bring intensified scientific scrutiny as physicists examined the technical details he had presented. Chapter 6: Scientific Scrutiny and Skepticism. By the early 1990s, Bob Lazar's claims had moved into national discussion. As his visibility increased, so did critical examination. Scientists, journalists, and skeptics began to evaluate the technical and biographical elements of his story with greater precision. The first area of scrutiny concerned his academic credentials. MIT and Caltech publicly stated they possessed no record of his enrollment. Alumni directories and archives did not list his name. In scientific culture, credentials establish mentorship lineage and peer networks. Graduate study in physics involves close supervision. The absence of classmates or dissertations associated with Lazar became a central argument for skeptics. Lazar maintained his records were removed to discredit him. However, critics pointed out that erasing history across multiple institutions would require extreme coordination across archives and databases. No documentation of such erasure has surfaced. Attention also turned to his claimed employment at Los Alamos. While his name appeared in a phone directory, questions arose regarding his role. Investigative efforts suggested he may have worked for a subcontractor rather than as a staff physicist. This would weaken the plausibility of his recruitment. Scientific scrutiny extended to the technical claims. Lazar's description of gravity amplification through element 115 was evaluated against established theory. In the early 90s, physics had not identified a stable isotope of the element. When the element was later synthesized in 2003, the produced isotopes were highly unstable. No evidence emerged of the stable variant Lazar described. Physicists noted that generating significant gravitational effects requires enormous mass or energy. The concept of a compact reactor remains outside experimentally verified science. While theoretical speculation exists in areas such as quantum gravity, no laboratory demonstration has approached the capabilities Lazar outlined. Another point was the hand geometry scanners. later confirmed to exist, which supporters cited as corroboration. Skeptics observed that such devices were not unknown in high-security contexts. Investigators also examined inconsistencies in early interviews. Supporters maintained the core story remained stable. The broader scientific community largely refrained from direct engagement. Without physical samples or reproducible data, his assertions remained outside formal discourse. By the mid-90s, Lazar had become a polarizing figure. UFO communities saw him as a credible insider. Skeptical organizations cited educational discrepancies as decisive evidence. It is important to situate this scrutiny within the historical context. The end of the Cold War reduced certain secrecy while maintaining others. Public trust in institutions fluctuated. Revelations about classified programs contributed to a climate in which some were prepared to believe extraordinary projects existed. At the same time, scientific methodology remained unchanged. Claims of revolutionary physics require empirical validation. No such validation emerged in support of Lazar's descriptions. Labs continued to investigate without finding evidence of gravity control. Chapter 6 represents the phase in which Lazar's narrative encountered analytical challenge. Biographical inconsistencies and physical improbabilities were documented. Yet despite these challenges, his story did not disappear. It persisted in public discourse, sustained by media appearances and the mystery surrounding Area 51. The next stage of the chronology will explore how his testimony influenced UFO culture and how the symbol of Area 51 evolved in the American imagination. Chapter 7: Cultural Impact and the Rise of the Disclosure Movement. By the mid-1990s, Bob Lazar's story had moved beyond questions of individual credibility and entered the wider landscape of American culture. The name Area 51, once obscure, began to appear regularly in books, documentaries, and radio discussions. Lazar did not invent the concept of secret government involvement, but his contribution differed in tone. He framed his account as insider testimony from within a classified scientific program. Throughout the 1990s, talk radio like Coast to Coast AM offered long-format interviews. Simultaneously, the cultural environment was changing. The end of the Cold War left a vacuum. Popular TV series like The X-Files dramatized themes of concealed government projects and extraterrestrial presence. While fictional, these programs reinforced a climate receptive to narratives like Lazar's. Area 51 shifted from classified obscurity to cultural symbol. In 1994, the United States government formally acknowledged the existence of Groom Lake as a testing site, though it did not confirm the activities alleged by Lazar. The acknowledgement was limited, addressing land use matters. Nonetheless, official recognition validated its reality in the public mind. Lazar's influence extended into emerging internet communities. By the late 90s, online forums began to replace cassette recordings as primary vehicles for discussion. During this period, the term disclosure gained prominence. It referred to the belief that governments possessed evidence of extraterrestrial contact not revealed to the public. Lazar was often cited as an early whistleblower. His story provided a template: classified site, compartmentalized research, recovered craft. His narrative became intertwined with broader cultural skepticism toward institutions. Revelations of previously secret government activities in other domains reinforced this perception. Professional scientists largely maintained distance from the discussion. Without material evidence, Lazar's claims remained outside academic inquiry. This created an informational divide. Lazar himself reduced his public appearances for a period, focusing on operating a business related to scientific equipment. His relative withdrawal did not diminish the circulation of his earlier interviews. Recorded footage continued to be re-examined by new audiences. Culturally, Area 51 evolved into a symbol representing secrecy more broadly. It appeared in films, novels, and video games. In many depictions, the line between aerospace testing and speculative research blurred. Lazar's detailed descriptions of S4 and gravity propulsion contributed to this imagery. Even individuals unfamiliar with his name often encountered concepts he had popularized. Throughout these decades, Lazar's core story remained largely unchanged. This consistency was seen as evidence of authenticity by supporters. Chapter 7 illustrates how an individual testimony can influence cultural discourse independent of institutional validation. Whether regarded as credible or not, Lazar's account became part of the architecture of modern UFO belief. As the chronology advances, the story will move into the late 21st century, when renewed media attention intersected with his long-standing claims. Chapter 8. Renewed attention in the 21st century. By the second decade of the 21st century, Bob Lazar's story had been in circulation for nearly 30 years. Yet broader developments in public discussion of unidentified aerial phenomena would bring his name back into prominence. In 2017, several articles in major newspapers reported that the US Department of Defense had funded a program to study unidentified aerial phenomena. Accompanying these reports were declassified Navy videos showing objects exhibiting unusual flight characteristics. The official terminology avoided references to extraterrestrial origin. Nonetheless, the acknowledgement marked a shift in tone. For many observers, this created a new context in which earlier whistleblower claims were reconsidered. Lazar's description of remote Nevada facilities seemed less implausible to audiences who now understood that aerial investigations had indeed been conducted. In 2018, filmmaker Jeremy Corbell released a documentary centered on Lazar's account. The film presented extended interviews in which Lazar reiterated the details of his alleged work at S4. The production included archival footage and contemporary commentary. The documentary introduced Lazar to a younger generation. Around the same period, Lazar appeared on a widely viewed long-form podcast. The conversational format allowed him to recount his story in detail without traditional time constraints. The renewed exposure occurred in an environment shaped by digital media. Social platforms amplified discussion. Independent commentators analyzed his statements frame by frame. Debates unfolded across online communities that did not exist during his first public appearance. At the same time, skepticism remained. Journalists revisited earlier investigations into his educational claims. Critics emphasized that no new documentation had emerged to substantiate his account. The scientific issues remained unresolved. It is during this period that the US government formally acknowledged the existence of Area 51 by name. While relating to historical aircraft testing, it confirmed what had long been suspected. In 2020 and 2021, the Department of Defense released additional reports. These documents stated that certain encounters remained unexplained, but did not attribute them to extraterrestrial origin. The reports emphasized the need for further data analysis, reflecting a cautious approach. Within this evolving landscape, Lazar's narrative occupied a complex position. Discussion normalization reduced the stigma, yet official investigations did not confirm reverse-engineered craft. Lazar appeared to express ambivalence about renewed attention, stating he had not sought celebrity and preferred privacy. The durability of his story illustrates how certain narratives persist even without institutional validation. Once established in cultural memory, they become reference points. Chapter 8 reflects a period in which historical testimony intersected with modern transparency efforts. Information circulated instantly. Audiences were global. Yet the central questions surrounding Lazar's claims remained fundamentally unchanged. As the chronology approaches its conclusion, the focus shifts from renewed media exposure to long-term legacy. These questions frame the final chapter. Chapter 9. Legacy, Memory, and the Question of Evidence. More than 3 decades after Bob Lazar first appeared on television, his name remains inseparable from Area 51. Whether regarded as a whistleblower or an unreliable narrator, Lazar occupies a permanent place in the cultural history of American secrecy. Assessing his legacy requires separating factual claims from his immense influence on public discourse. From an evidentiary standpoint, the central difficulty remains unchanged. Lazar has not produced physical artifacts, technical documents, or verifiable academic transcripts. The institutions he cited possess no record of his attendance. No independently verified colleague has publicly corroborated his participation. Within the norms of scientific methodology, these absences are significant. At the same time, his testimony has displayed notable internal stability. Since 1989, he has repeated the same essential framework: recruitment through Los Alamos, assignment to S4, propulsion powered by element 115, and dismissal. He has not dramatically expanded or embellished the core structure. For supporters, this consistency strengthens credibility. For critics, consistency without corroboration remains insufficient. His story intersects with documented Cold War secrecy protocols at Groom Lake. Lazar's legacy is most visible in the transformation of Area 51 from an obscure testing ground to a global cultural symbol. Before his interviews, the site was known primarily within defense communities. Afterward, it became shorthand for hidden knowledge. Films and novels reference it as a repository of secrets. Even individuals unfamiliar with his biography often encounter concepts he helped popularize. The endurance of his narrative also reflects technological shifts in media. In 1989, distribution depended on local television. By the 21st century, digital platforms allowed his story to reach millions instantly. The persistence of archived footage ensured that new audiences could revisit original statements without mediation. There is also a psychological dimension. Stories of concealed knowledge resonate in societies where trust in institutions fluctuates. Lazar's account aligned with a broader cultural skepticism toward authority. For historians, the challenge lies in distinguishing cultural significance from empirical validation. Whether Lazar witnessed non-human technology remains unresolved. Yet the fact that his testimony generates discussion is historically meaningful. In an environment of uncertainty, his claims occupy a liminal space. They are neither confirmed nor definitively disproven. They persist as an unresolved assertion at the edge of knowledge. Notably, Lazar did not convert his story into sustained institutional authority or large research organizations. He has maintained a limited public presence, declining to expand beyond established details. This restraint differentiates him from figures who continually elaborate their narratives. Ultimately, the evaluation returns to fundamental principles of evidence. Extraordinary assertions require demonstrable data. Without physical samples, scientific acceptance remains unlikely. Lazar's place in history may be less about propulsion systems and more about the intersection of secrecy, belief, and modern media. His testimony emerged as Cold War opacity met expanding broadcast platforms. It matured during the rise of digital communication. It now exists within an era of partial institutional transparency. The story concludes without definitive resolution. There is no recovered artifact, no newly opened archive. What remains is a narrative sustained across decades, situated within cultural curiosity about the unknown. Lazar's legacy is not a solved mystery, but an enduring question. It reflects the human impulse to seek explanations beyond established boundaries and the demand for verifiable proof. Between those two forces, his story continues to reside. This concludes our look into Bob Lazar and the mystery of S4.